Hi, my name is Chris and this is Battle Nonsense. 2015 has been a big year for the Battlefield franchise. On one hand we have DICE LA, which continued to impress us with high tick rate support, the community map project and the remake of the Battlefield 2 classic map, Dragon Valley. On the other hand we have the Battlefield spin-off Hardline, which didn't manage to impress the players for many different reasons. Also, DICE Stockholm released Star Wars Battlefront, and some of the people who worked on it will now join the development team of the next Battlefield game, which we sadly don't know much about, other than that it will be military themed and released sometime in 2016. I guess that we can expect to see the first teaser or trailer of this new Battlefield game at the Game Developers Conference in March, and close before E3 begins in June we will get to see much more of that game. But what do we want from the next Battlefield? And what have DICE and EA planned for that game? One of the hottest topics that gamers discuss currently is if publishers should really charge full price for multiplayer-only games. And in the center of this discussion is the latest game from DICE and EA, Star Wars Battlefront. One of the arguments is that a game is not worth full price if it does not have a single player or does not have enough guns. But while we have one group of players demanding a single player experience for games that are multiplayer focused, we also have another group of players who say that the next Battlefield game has to focus on just the multiplayer, and not even bother with a single player, as they were not even good in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4. And many players felt that DICE should have better spent more time on the multiplayer instead of developing these on-rails generic single players. On top of that, a few of the more popular people in the Battlefield community recently said that the next game should better have less guns, because they feel that Battlefield 4 had too many of them. Now here's what I think. If a product is worth full price or not mostly depends on the consumer and his expectations. Let's take Call of Duty for example. Believe it or not, but there are a lot of players out there who only buy it for its single player and never even touch the multiplayer. This means that if the next Call of Duty is multiplayer only, then you will have a lot of angry players out there who will tell you that this game should not be sold at full price because they feel that they only get half of a game. And I can understand this concern because these players are either looking for just the single player or the combined single and multiplayer experience. It's what they expect from this particular franchise. So does the lack of a narrative single player or a too low amount of guns and game modes automatically mean that the game will not be a success, like Titanfall and Evolve? The missing single-player component surely does affect sales, as the game will not appeal to players who are looking for that experience. But the real reason why multiplayer-focused games like Titanfall and Evolve could not maintain a high active player count is far more complex than that. Long before its release, Evolve confused everyone with its complex DLC plan, which made it look like a lot of the content was locked behind a paywall, and that surely did hurt the reputation of the game and its sales. But the real problem was the gameplay, as it had basic design issues, balancing issues, and it got repetitive pretty fast. So after some time most players didn't really have a reason to return to the game or to play it on a regular basis. And so the player count dropped very fast after the first few months. And today the game is pretty much dead. Titanfall was obviously a Call of Duty competitor, and as such it tried to appeal to that audience. An audience which is accustomed to games that include a single and a multiplayer. So the multiplayer-only Titanfall was obviously not able to provide the entire target audience with what they were looking for. It was also criticized for its lack of guns, something that didn't bother me at all because I don't need 20 more or less different shotguns or SMGs in order to enjoy the game. But this was a problem, because the target audience of that game had this expectation. I played Titanfall for quite some time and it was really great, I enjoyed it a lot. But what broke it for me eventually was its DLC plan and how it split the community. With every new DLC that got released, the waiting times and the matchmaking got longer, until I had to wait more than 5 minutes to get into a match. Also, while the gameplay itself was a lot of fun and very well designed, it did wear off relatively fast, which then led to a quickly decreasing player count, and this again increased the matchmaking times. So even if these games had a story-driven single player, the multiplayer part would have died anyway because of the issues that this part of the game suffered from. So the lack of a story-driven single player was the smallest problem of these multiplayer-focused games, because the longevity of it was affected by many other factors that had nothing to do with a story-driven single player. The shockingly low player numbers of Battlefield Hardline show us that the presence of a single player does not ensure or help the longevity of your multiplayer-focused game, and adapt that the single player in Battlefield Hardline makes anyone feel better about the money they spent on the game. So if you want that your multiplayer-focused game can maintain a high player count over multiple years, then you need to avoid that your players get bored. And you need to give them enough content at launch, because this helps to provide the player with a diverse experience, and it makes him feel like he got something for his money. Star Wars Battlefront has a problem with both, because the game mechanics are very simple, and so the game becomes repetitive very quickly. And while I don't care much about the low amount of guns, the few planets or maps that you can play on do not make me feel like I got a lot of content for my money. To me, it really feels like the rest of the game is locked behind the Season Pass paywall, which I'm not willing to pay for. If we take the Star Wars theme away from Battlefront, then there's really not much left that justifies its price tag or the Season Pass. It almost feels like half of the price goes to the Star Wars license. And this is one of the reasons why Battlefront is part of that discussion, that multiplayer-only games should cost less than games that have a story-driven single player and a multiplayer. Even though this discussion misses the point, because a multiplayer-only game can also be worth full price. When we look back at the early days of the Battlefield franchise, then we will see that Battlefield 1942, Battlefield Vietnam, Battlefield 2 and Battlefield 2142 were all full-price multiplayer-only titles. So did anyone complain about the lack of a story-driven single player back then? Not at all. Did it hurt the longevity of these games? Definitely not, because Battlefield 2 is still played today 10 years after its release and the shutdown of the GameSpy servers. Did someone feel that they didn't get enough value for their money? On the contrary, many players will tell you that with Battlefield 2 they got more value for their money than with Battlefield 3 or Battlefield 4. And the reason for that is that they released these games with a decent amount of maps which offered a lot of tactical variety, so the matches would not always turn out the exact same way. Later on, patches even added more maps for free. Also, the game had a lot of depth and a high skill ceiling, which means that you didn't quickly reach the point where you felt that this is the best that you can get in that game. There were also a lot of different things that you could do and try to master, which is one of the reasons why the gameplay didn't felt boring or repetitive. Teamwork and communications also were an integral part of the game, so that even on publics you had a lot of teamwork. You could also rent a ranked server from a game server provider, or you could download the unranked server files and host one yourself. You were also able to play all the multiplayer maps locally against bots, either alone or with a friend who was connected to the same network. We even had server-side demo recording, which allowed you to download the demo file from the server and review the entire match from any camera angle. And most importantly, these games had mod support, which means that there was an endless stream of community-created maps, small fun mods and total conversion modifications, which turned the game into a military simulation, a World War II shooter, a Pirates game or a Lego game. This is why no one had a problem to pay full price for these multiplayer-only Battlefield titles, and why these games had absolutely no longevity problems. The players got a lot of content and a rich multiplayer experience for their money, and this made them happy. So after Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, many players suggested that DICE should go back to the roots of the franchise, not just in terms of the game design and its mechanics, but also in terms of what they should focus on: the multiplayer and the multiplayer only. But could Battlefield 2016 work as a full-price multiplayer-only title? Well, if it's not Bad Company 3, where I really enjoyed the single player in the first two games, then yes, I would totally pay full price for it, if DICE and EA does their job right, like they did in the old Battlefield games. For me, the presence of a single player, like the ones in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, do not add any additional value to these games. And really, I don't enjoy to be forced to play it multiple times in order to get access to all the guns. So I for one would be very happy if Battlefield 5, or whatever it's called, is multiplayer only, where all the maps and factions in the game do not depend on a single player and its so-called story. Now, how about that other concern, that the next game would be better with less guns? For some reason, a few people think that Battlefield 4 is bad because of how many guns it features. As I said before, I don't care much about how many guns a game provides, as long as these are well balanced and not locked behind a stupid paywall like premium or pre-order deals, or that you are forced to play a part of the game that you don't want to play, like the single player. So I don't see how the next game would be better if you just decrease the amount of guns. The only thing that really annoys me about the guns in Battlefield 4 is the stupid unlock system, which forces you to unlock the same scope for every single gun, and that you need to unlock guns in a particular order. I really don't like to unlock 5 guns that I don't want just to get the one that I actually want. If DICE could do a better job in the next game, then I don't mind 100 different assault rifles, as long as these are properly balanced. Which means that the next one must not get more powerful than the previous one you own, as that would give more power to more experienced players. So the various assault rifles should feel slightly different, but there must not be useless ones and super powerful ones. What they really have to reduce and rethink though is the amount of gadgets and tools they put into the game. There's too much redundancy and silly nonsense in Battlefield 4 that feels like it was only put in because marketing said that we need X amount of tools. And the same sadly has to be said about the game modes. DICE really needs to have a master plan for the next game, and then only add things that actually fit into that plan. Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 seem to have a master plan along the lines of here's a sandbox with a lot of stuff, now go and blow some shit up. Which is one of the reasons why we have all those gameplay and teamwork issues in these games. So I really hope that DICE and EA realize why the experience on public servers is such a mess in the last 2 Battlefield games. And that they are willing to change it even if that means to make the game a bit less casual friendly. In my Battlefield 1982 design project I highlighted what is causing the teamwork and objective play problems in Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, and while I note that the game I propose is too extreme for today's Battlefield community, as it's much more like the old Battlefield games, there are still a few designs that could be used in the next game, which would have a pretty dramatic impact on how the game is played on public servers. But what is EA planning for Battlefield 2016? Well, we don't know exactly, but there was an interesting development recently, as EA announced their competitive gaming division, which is led by Peter Moore. This shows that EA wants to get more present in the competitive and esports sector, because they realize that this is becoming more popular every year. And the franchises that they mentioned so far are FIFA, Madden NFL and Battlefield. So the interesting question is now how that will affect the Battlefield franchise. The positive impact could be that the next Battlefield game will have a higher skill ceiling as well as a more refined and focused game design, similar to the original 4 Battlefield titles, which would make me very happy. Now, my concern is that EA looks at Counter-Strike and Call of Duty a bit too much when they try to figure out why these are so popular in esport. This could then result in a much heavier focus on small and infantry-heavy maps, which means that the game is turned into another generic shooter as it loses what Battlefield is known for. We have more or less seen that already in Battlefield 3, which had maps like Metro, Siva Tower and a few more, which all tried to appeal to fans of games like Call of Duty. I think that in order to be successful, Battlefield needs to feel, look and play differently than the other popular esports games. It has to stand out and it must provide the audience with something different. This is obviously a big challenge, but it can be done. And DICE Stockholm and DICE LA are already on the right track, as we finally have a competitive netcode that not even CSGO can laugh about anymore, and with Obliteration we have a promising game mode for esport. What is missing is a bit of a spectacle and the potential for matches to play out in very different ways. The problem that Obliteration has in Battlefield 4 is the same that in example soccer has. When the stakes are high, then the leading team will usually begin to play very defensive to make sure that they win. That's good for the team, but it makes the match extremely boring to watch. One way to get around that would be to add a timer to the bomb in Obliteration, which activates as soon as it becomes available. This means that once it's on the battlefield you have a limited amount of time to get it to its destination before it blows up. That way you can avoid that the leading team takes the bomb, moves it far away from the objectives and then protects it for the next 8 minutes until the round ends. Which might also be a good idea for soccer. Another concern is that we are blowing up MCOM stations in Obliteration, which is quite boring for the audience. When you think about Battlefield, then since Bad Company you have to think about destruction. I like real destruction, this means that I take my RPG and then blow up a building. And dynamic destruction, which means that I can repair a bridge that has been destroyed. What I'm not a big fan of are those scripted Levolution sequences in Battlefield 4's Conquest mode. But in Obliteration, these Levolution events could add the spectacle that the audience is looking for. Which means that instead of blowing up a MCOM somewhere, you destroy large structures on the map, which then affects how the rest of the match will be played, as this destruction changes the map in favor of one of the teams. Which brings us to the next point, the map design. The next Battlefield game needs better maps than Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4 offered. Maps that allow you to make your own path by utilizing destruction, and they need to offer multiple routes which allow you to choose from different tactics. Maps that are just a corridor with a boiling point in the middle, or maps where you can fire into the main base of the other team from across the map, simply must not exist. Also, the idea to have one map support all game modes has to die. Modes like Conquest and Rush need maps specifically designed for these modes, as otherwise you have a map where only one of the game modes works great and the other one is just crap, or both don't work right. For esports, DICE could build special maps that fulfill the needs of the competitive scene. The downside of that is that only DICE can build and change them, and this means that updates will probably have to be linked to the game's patches. A better approach would be to offer at least a level editor, so that the competitive scene is able to build their own maps or modify one of the game's retail maps for better competitive support. Full mod support would be ideal, but to add that to the engine as an afterthought is much more work than building the engine with mod support in mind, which DICE sadly didn't do for some reason. So to get at least a level editor where you can modify the terrain and move around the assets that are included in the game would greatly help the popularity and the longevity of the game, as the community will then be able to show us how creative it is and the competitive scene could fine-tune the maps, which makes Battlefield more successful in esport. As it turned out, modding is not a declining trend after all. DICE and EA surely learned a lot from Battlefield 3, Battlefield 4 and Hardline. Now we can only wait and see how those lessons affect the next title, and if these result in a true Battlefield game that is worth our money, or if it gets turned into something else. If you enjoyed this video, then give it a like, subscribe for more, and I hope to see you next time. Until then, have a nice day and take care. My name is Chris and this was Battle Nonsense.